John Mozeliak said goodbye in a press conference at Busch Stadium on Monday afternoon. We'll discuss what he had to say in his final public appearance as the baseball operations face of the Cardinals, and we'll look forward to Tuesday's press conference, which will feature Chaim Bloom in his new role. All coming up on b-schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Monday, September 29th, 2025. You get not one but two end-of-season press conferences this year, Cardinals fans. Kind of going to make up for not having one, I guess, at the end of 2023. I don't know if people still care about that, but it's fun to joke about. But all your low-hanging fruit and your net and your candidlies and you're at the end of the days, I hope you got them all out, because John Mozeliak is now out as Cardinals president of baseball operations. Had his outgoing press conference on Monday afternoon at Busch Stadium. Kind of an opportunity for Mozeliak to say goodbye, to be able to address the public for one last time. And, you know, it wasn't particularly instructive, I think, in terms of the forward-facing stuff. That's more going to be Chaim Bloom's jurisdiction on Tuesday morning at Busch Stadium. I believe that presser is scheduled for 10 a.m. Central Time, and I believe that, like today's was, will be live streamed in a number of places. I know today's was on STL Sports Central and their YouTube channel. You can check that out tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe over there for the live feed of the Chaim Bloom presser. I believe Joe Roderick's going to put that up again. He was there this afternoon, and Joe and I then went live on STL Sports Central with an instant reaction show. So if you'd like to hear even more about the breakdown, you can head on over there after you're done listening to this podcast. But I wanted to jump on and reflect a little bit on John Mozeliak's words from Monday. Like I said, instructive to the future? No, not really, because most of the questions that Mo answered, if it had something to do with maybe what comes next for the Cardinals, he sort of answered it from the perspective of a Cardinals fan, right? Said, I'll put my fan hat on, and maybe redirected some of the questions to say that's more for Chaim and his group to be able to explain maybe what the thinking might be on that. But I thought there were a couple of notable questions and answers that in a press conference like this, which it is a little bit different to have two of them and to split it up the way that they are, but it feels also appropriate given that John Mozeliak has been a high-ranking baseball operations executive of the St. Louis Cardinals for nearly my entire lifetime. I was born in 94. Mo joined the Cardinals in 96. You're talking about basically 30 years of service to the Cardinal organization and leading the baseball operations department for nearly 20 years of that stretch. So a significant chunk of time and worthy of a send-off that happens in his way, right? Bill DeWitt Jr. said a few words, opening remarks ahead of John Mozeliak today. Mozeliak himself ended up with some opening remarks that he wanted to say, thanking a lot of folks as he went along. There were some people that chimed in on a group chat of mine, and then I saw some comments on our not post-game, but instant reaction show on STL Sports Central. Said, oh, Brenden, Mo thanked the writers, but didn't thank you. And I said, that's not a surprise to me. This year I've been not around the ballpark as much, honestly, as I have been in past years, and doing a lot of the post-game shows and different things like that. Still doing my writing for STL Sports Central, but I've not been around as much, so I was not offended by that for anybody that was tuning in and was like, uh-oh, I got to hear the dirt. I don't think there is any. I didn't always say the most nice things about Mozeliak, but I always thought I tried to be fair. But no, I didn't read into that in any way, shape, or form. But he, wanted to thank a lot of people that were in the organization, and I thought it was nice that he generally did direct some thoughts to the media and the writers about, understanding the sort of relationship there, and that everybody has a job to do. But I think he got an opportunity to, say what he wanted to say, and then you can kind of cut the cord and allow for Cardinals fans to hear from the future and what comes next with the notion of a rebuild. That word being thrown around, and is something that John Mozeliak hesitated to do. And I think there was, if you read into some of his words from Monday, you can sort of understand that that's maybe a bit of a point of pride for him, that he said, look, under my tenure, we never did enter into that. That may be something for the fellas tomorrow to be able to say. I think he said even something to that effect. But I think that's notable for Mozeliak, and certainly the good does outweigh the bad. It's just been that recently it's gotten a little bit stale, and the Cardinals and their fan base are certainly looking to turn over a new leaf and figure out, the way back to competitiveness as soon as possible. I wanted to play a couple of quotes from the press conference, and this first one's going to come from John Mozeliak's opening remarks, in which he thanked a lot of different people, but also acknowledged a little bit of, more recently, in particular, hearing what he described as the drumbeat for the sense that the Cardinal organization would benefit from a new voice and new leadership.
I've been asked over the past year, why step down? And to me, it became simple. I love this job, but I also knew it was time for a change. Trying to reinvent yourself every year can be challenging. The drumbeat was getting louder, candidly real loud, for a new voice, and I heard it.
So I thought that was interesting from John Mozeliak. Those were part of his introductory preamble, prepared statement that he wanted to make before taking questions from the assembled media. And look, I think from Cardinals fans that I hear from on social media and different places like that, the question probably wasn't framed in the way of why step down. But from those Mo speaks with and is close to and talks to on a personal basis, I'm sure that was the question, because that is what he did. He was not fired, and I don't think he ever would have been. I think it was a mutual time of understanding that this made sense to do, but I think that the timeline largely for Mozeliak's exit from the organization would have remained about the same if the team was still having success. I think this, within maybe a year or two span, it might not have been the exact same timeline and gone down the exact same way, but I do think that would have been the case. 30 years in an organization is a long time, and so I think he was to the point where he was probably ready for a change in the organization, especially considering the way things have gone. But even if it had been still going well, I think it would have just been, a transfer of power, and you wouldn't have maybe seen Mike Gersh reassigned and do a different role, VP of Special Projects, and you maybe would have been talking about, well, is it going to be Flo or Gersh that ends up running the show? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with those gentlemen. I obviously, with Mike Gersh, like I said, reassigned from the GM role prior to this year, I would not be surprised if he just lands somewhere else in baseball. But like Randy Flores and his relationship with Chaim Bloom is one that I think is going to be interesting to explore and see the way that may go, because like Chaim Bloom, very much coming from the Tampa Bay school with the Rays organization as a draft and develop organization, their ownership certainly did not have the pockets to be able to, play in the free agency waters every year and win that way. And, even when the way that John Mozeliak described the haves and the have-nots in the league today, certainly positioning the Cardinals more on the have-not side of things, and you can agree or disagree with that. Obviously, the Dodgers and groups like that, the Mets with Steve Cohen, they're the haves. I mean, they have the ability to basically spend at will. And I'm not suggesting the Cardinals can or should do that under DeWitt's ownership group, but I do think that they could probably be a little bit more competitive with the spending. But also, I'm saying that in a year where there was another downturn in attendance, and so those comments that bothered a lot of people from Bill DeWitt III, where he sort of laughed off the idea that people would kind of stage a boycott if they didn't like what they saw from the product on the field, which is, of course, basically happened in the time since that radio comment was made by the team president, Bill DeWitt III. Like, I do think that now you're going to see even more of sort of that downturn when it comes to, okay, if we can't expect attendance because we're kind of announcing a rebuild here, and this is something that fans have been asking for a while anyway, because they want to see the fruits on the other side of that potential path, it's going to mean that for the lean years, they're probably going to continue to see downturns in attendance. I don't know that it can get a whole heck of a lot lower than it was this year, but I think it can in terms of paid attendance. Like the butts and seats, it was pretty bleak. But again, you're spending your dollars where you want to, and I understand that for sure. I'm not blaming anybody within the Cardinal fan base. I think it's just very clear the direction that things have gone, and I don't think the messaging of the organization for several years toward the end, where Mozeliak continued to ask for patience, helped in that regard. I think people kind of were ready to sort of buy in when there were little signs that it made sense to do so, and continuing to fall just short, and then be asked for patience, keep buying in, keep supporting, and then it goes the other way where they didn't really want to say this was going to be a rebuild year. It's more of a transitional year, or a retool, if you will. And now it's like, look, the proof is going to be in the pudding. If this next group ends up trading away guys like Brendan Donovan, or guys where you're barely sniffing arbitration eligibility, guys like Alec Burleson, like what happens with players that you would say under any other era of Bill DeWitt's ownership group you would say those guys are just the type that you draft, develop, and then when they turn out to be pretty solid players, you re-sign them, extend them, and then that's your core. Whereas right now, I don't know that that's going to be the way things go with Chaim Bloom's leadership of the organization. But like I said, some subtle ways that John Mozeliak was able to maybe distance himself a little bit from what's to come, because even though this was transitioning to what that will look like, I think on the field there is the potential that you're playing with a much, much lower payroll. When you think about the way that the Cardinals might try to even move some money with Arenado, he's not going to be here. Sonny Gray's not going to be here. I'm just telling you, those two players will not be Cardinals. I don't know how many people out there in the ether are saying it that firmly, but would be shocked if either of them are here next year. Wilson Contreras is a different story, and we'll get into more of kind of the individual situations for some of these guys and talk about it all off season. Like that's what this is going to be as we get into the wintertime. And there is playoff baseball yet to go. Cardinals not participating in that. The Reds are, Cubs are, Brewers are, but not the Cardinals, as it were. So interested to see kind of the way that impacts things from a payroll perspective. Again, my concern is that fans have been tired of being in the middle. The Cardinals, there's a perception, and I think it's reality, that the Cardinals have been too close to the middle in recent years, where there wasn't the ceiling to unlock that they could end up going really far in the postseason. And so when people are hearing, hey, they're going to rebuild, they're going to be willing to take that step back, I think people are excited about that. But I also think my concern is that they may go all the way full Tampa Bay Rays mode, where it's like, is this guy in arbitration eligibility? Okay, we're not going to sign him long term because we just, that's just not the way that we do things here. So we're going to trade him and see what we can get. And like, if you make effective trades, that can still work out for you. And it may be the best way to do it, frankly. But I think what you are doing in that situation is really foregoing the next 2 to 3 years, if not longer, because sometimes those trades don't end up being effective. And you look at what you could have had for multiple more seasons of quality players at cost-controlled levels, but you wanted to try to maximize the absolute peak of their trade value because you just didn't foresee a situation where you were ever going to extend the payroll back into a place that included them. And that would be my concern, is if Chaim Bloom's role with the Cardinals fits so well the DeWitt ownership viewpoint of the way things are going to have to go, and that's why they brought him in, because you say, my goodness, look at what he was a part of with Tampa and what they were able to do, and my gosh, the Red Sox ended up unloading on Chaim Bloom and firing him, but they probably should have given him a longer chance, because look at what he was able to bring to the Red Sox farm system, and they're reaping the benefits of that with some of the young players that they called up this year, and they weren't patient enough with Chaim Bloom. Well, we're going to be patient because we're doing a full-scale rebuild. Like, I think that could be the vibe, and it may end up working out. I'm just saying, I think it sort of does take ownership off the hook a little bit if fans are so bought into, people finally telling them what they've wanted to hear, that they're going to rebuild. Where I think, gosh darn, they won 78 games this year with a decreased payroll. If you strip it down to the absolute studs, you probably lose even more games next year, while you are basically acknowledging that, hey, yeah, the pre-arb years of guys like Mason Wynn, and whether it's Victor Scott or Alec Burleson, like some of the years of those guys where they're cheap and you're able to afford part of your, the core pieces to what your roster is going to look like during those years, during, the Weatherholt years. Well, Weatherholt is very affordable over the next 2 to 3 years before he goes into arbitration down the line. Like, it feels like that's a time to probably not max out and say we got to spend, but recognize that in 2 or 3 years, when you think you're ready, now Mason Wynn needs to get paid, and now some of those other guys are going to need to get paid. And so it is sort of a revolving door in that respect, and it takes a delicate balancing act, I think. The sharp organizations can do it, and I think that the Cardinals have sharp guys in their front office now. And it's not that Mo wasn't sharp, but I don't think he was sharp to the changes that have happened in the game. It's like he was on the forefront of a lot of those things with what this Cardinal organization did from a draft and develop standpoint during the early days of his tenure. But now, certainly the Cardinals have fallen behind, and this past year has been about getting back up to speed. So I think certainly it's going to be interesting to see how Chaim Bloom is able to take that baton as Mozeliak passes it off earlier today at Busch, and where he may go from there will be very compelling. But I wanted to continue reflecting a little bit on the Mozeliak stuff. You can certainly let your comments be known here in the comment section below. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, you can do the same in that regard as well, because there are comments available there too. But I wanted to play this. It is a question from, if I can find it here, from Katie Wu of The Athletic, who asked Mozeliak to reflect on this idea of a transition year and some of the questions they tried to answer as an organization and whether they were ultimately successful in accomplishing that and what was actually answered by the organization in terms of some of the players they were evaluating this year, which I thought was a great question because it wasn't exactly forward-facing. It was about the future. It was kind of the theme of the season, but it asks point blank, like, did you accomplish what you intended to accomplish this year?
Well, prior to the season starting, you made it very clear that the priority of this season was to hopefully answer questions going into years to come, especially with this current roster. Do you feel that you've accomplished that? And if so, what was answered?
Yeah, probably not as clearly as we hoped, right? I think some players we were hoping to learn a little bit more about, but in the end, I think that's the challenge of this offseason and what really lies ahead in the future. And I don't want to get into what I think each player needs to do. I think that's Chaim and his team, and all they have to decide what that looks like. But I do think the one takeaway I do have on this year was a lot of those younger players learned a lot. They fire hose. Maybe they didn't make the right adjustments or the adjustments soon enough, but hopefully they grow from that. When you get an opportunity to play every day, the goal is, can you produce, can you post? If you can do those two things, you can be in this game a long time. But if you're not doing those two things, things can be difficult for you. And I think our players learned a lot from that this year.
So I thought that was some interesting stuff there from outgoing Cardinals president of baseball operations, John Mozeliak, from his press conference on Monday. Great question by Katie Wu. And it was mentioned in there, like I had kind of alluded to, some references to, well, that's sort of Chaim and his team and Ollie and those guys will have to figure out. And I just wanted to make a note of that for anyone that may be confused about the topic. Ollie Marmol is the Cardinals manager and will continue to be. I know that 2026 is currently the final year of his contract. I would be surprised if that is not changed between now and opening day. It could happen tomorrow. We did the show with Joe Roderick on STL Sports Central, and he was pretty adamant that he felt it was going to be tomorrow, that's going to be announced that Ollie is getting the extension. But there's not any doubt about who is the on-field leader of the organization as the field manager. It's Oliver Marmol. I have maintained over and over and over again that I believe that is the correct decision. Again, you cannot, on one side, criticize and ridicule Mozeliak in his front office for not putting the team in the best position to win, not maximizing roster moves and things of that nature over the last few years, but then turn around and say, Ollie didn't win enough. If anything, Ollie has outperformed what the expectations ought to have been. The Cardinals were slightly above their Vegas win total for this year. I think it was similar in the way that last year they outperformed their run differential, which was, it's something that you do it once, maybe kind of a fluke. You do it over and over. Maybe you're doing something right. And I feel as though, Ollie Marmol, with what he's got, which we have all acknowledged is a flawed roster, and it's going to have to change significantly before the Cardinals are going to get back to competitive October baseball where everybody wants to see them. Ollie Marmol, to me, is the guy to lead them to that place when it happens. And I will maintain that if you gave every manager in Major League Baseball right now a roster that's like, let's say you give them all the 10th best roster, I think Ollie Marmol is going to get more out of that roster than about 25 other big league managers, maybe even more. I consider him to be one of the top 5 or 10 guys in the game. I really do. And I think if he had a roster that reflected that, he would really end up being somebody that would be praised for all of the things that he brings to the table, from just a guy who knows the game and is learning as he goes as well in terms of the role of a big league manager. I've been impressed with him even as the Cardinals haven't gone to the postseason the last couple of years. I think he does a really solid job, and I believe that he's actually a really good candidate to lead the Cardinals into the next iteration. Like the Cardinals losing 90 games next year with what I expect to be coming is also not an indictment of Oliver Marmol. And people are going to say, well, Brenden, when is the jig up? If eventually, you have to win games or it does fall on somebody. Well, I think Chaim Bloom and his group deserve several years to be able to kind of mold the organization and its roster in their vision. And it seems like Ollie Marmol is going to be a part of that vision. And I believe he should be. He was in the room today for the press conference for Mo. I assume he'll be in the room tomorrow. And you hear a lot of the ways that it's described that Chaim and Ollie will have to do X, Y, and Z or decide X, Y, and Z. It's described that way for a reason because Ollie's going to be around. So that's kind of your update on that one. I don't know if that was newsworthy from the press conference, but it reinforced what I already knew to be true. I don't know if it's newsworthy what I said with Joe on STL Sports Central's Instant Reaction show that, like, I think, as I sort of said a little bit here as well, Mo kind of picked his end date. He was not pushed out the door, and so you do wonder, and, like, does that change for Cardinals fans, their viewpoint on, how urgent or aggressive ownership is toward getting back to a winner if, like, I think Mo was sort of going to be allowed to decide when it was time more so than the other way around. And that's kind of how this played out. You could take that for however you want to, but I don't think it's inaccurate to describe it that way. I'm going to play one more quote from you just because the question that I asked for Mo was, curious about him mentioning that at the trade deadline this year, was to a different question, said that they could have maybe even done a little bit more in terms of trading away players. He said adding was never really something that they were close to doing. Things of that nature just did not come into fruition. But you could understand the question because maybe Mozeliak in his last year wanted to go out with a bang. But instead, he sort of did the small potatoes trades of guys that were on expiring contracts that they had to get rid of, but didn't extend beyond that. And when it came to guys like J.J. Weatherholt and Quinn Matthews, didn't overstep by saying, hey, we're going to call these guys up. Largely, I think when Mo talked about, I didn't really go to the minor league cities this year like I normally would. That was more Chaim's jurisdiction. Was Chaim basically in charge of, promotions and such throughout the minor league system throughout the year when it came to, like, from high A to double A, from double A to triple A, things like that. Obviously, when you call someone up to the big league level, that's going to have something to do with Mo for sure, being the guy that's making that decision. But I think it's also made in concert when J.J. Weatherholt does not get called up and Quinn Matthews does not get called up, because that allows for a more clean slate with roster stuff and 40-man stuff for Chaim Bloom to be able to decide upon how to handle that going into the offseason and into 2026. So that was the question I wanted to ask, was just, was that sort of the basis for decision-making of, hey, don't want to muddy the waters for the next guy at all? You'll hear that question from me in Mo's relatively brief answer, but it was the last one of the press conference, so I wanted to let y'all hear how the Mo era came to an end. Mo, you mentioned the notion of maybe could have even gone a little bit further, done more around the trade deadline. How much of the decision process this season was with a pretty heavy mindset on not wanting to make long-range implication type of decisions? You've mentioned a number of times, like, well, that's sort of for the next group to determine. How much did that play into potentially even going back to the offseason and the way that you guys wanted to handle roster decisions this year?
It was something in the back of my mind, but again, if we thought there was a right play to do something, we would have done it. But it was just not enough. It wasn't compelling enough to say yes to.
And that was really the end of it. Mo just saying, like, not compelling enough to say yes. I think you could be looking at teams who were interested in Newpar, if they were interested in Donovan or Burleson, some of those names at the deadline that would have said, okay, like, could do that. Maybe they end up doing that this offseason. But it's going to be up for Chaim Bloom's group to determine, hey, are we trading these players? If we're trading these players, what are we trading them for? And so that sort of plays into, I would say, a conservative final year in terms of the obvious decisions. Trade away an expiring Helsley, trade away an expiring Maton, et cetera, had to be made. But even like a Jojo Romero, who's got one more year left, hey, that's not going to be something that we're going to change. And, like, if those conversations had been compelling, where Mozeliak says, look, I mean, this offer that's on the table for Lars Newpar is actually a pretty good deal, I think at that point you rope Chaim Bloom in and like, it's a joint decision of, hey, how should we proceed with this? But not compelling per Mozeliak, and so they didn't end up proceeding with any of that. But that's really all I wanted to get out today. Just get back on the horse with B-Schaeff Daily. We'll be back again tomorrow after Chaim Bloom's press conference. Like I said, you can catch that live on the STL Sports Central YouTube channel. You can catch an instant reaction show with myself and Joe Roderick right after that comes to a conclusion on that same STL Sports Central channel. And then later in the day, I'll have B-Schaeff Daily up with some of my own personal musings in the solo podcast. Appreciate you guys, as always, for sticking with me and listening to the show. We will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.